Okay, Patrick, thank you very much. This was entertaining and it also was enlightening, I think, for us to understand better how the Brexiteers, and you make no secret out of that, you count yourself into that crowd, how they think and how they view the world. Let me say maybe two things before we go to a round of questions. First of all, let me jump to the rescue of the European Union. You say no one loves the European Union. And maybe you're even right on that, but the opposite, that everyone hates it, obviously is also wrong. And I know, of course, a lot of counterexamples, myself included. As an immigrant here, married to another immigrant from another country, we see a lot of good things in the European Union as well. We don't need to love it, to understand its value, and I think many in Europe, and I hope also in this room, do. So that's one thing where we don't rub our shoulders, and the second thing is, the gravity model was partly developed at the Institute, not by myself, but by my predecessor, Peter Egger, who is now in Switzerland, and we have continued working on that. Now, the gravity model as it was used in the 90s, 80s, was not good because it was not derived from a CGE model. Now, the gravity model that we use is derived from the Ricardian model that you praise. And so it is totally consistent with the classical theories of trade. And that allows us to plug it into a CGE model and learn from the gravity equation and from the econometric estimation of it, how we can think about scenarios. And so that brings me to the border, because the question is, how costly is a border really? And this is an important question. And you're right, I guess, that there's a lot of exaggeration around, and I don't like the report that you cited, the 8%. This is ridiculous in many ways. This is a piece of propaganda. No, it overdoes it a lot. On the other hand, there will be issues at the border for sure. Not only because the EU is behaving badly or trying to hit Brits, simply because it will be required to do conformity assessment at the border. Even if we have the same standards and we are not allowed to discriminate, you're fully right. EU customs will have to control whether the goods that come in conform to the standards. And that will become an issue in particular if the UK does free trade with China, where we're not sure that the quality of the products is right, and so we'll have to do conformity assessment checks, or with the United States, where European rules that I don't like, but still the European rules, rule out the import of hormone-treated beef and of chlorinated chicken and so on and so forth, and they will have to do those border checks at the new EU-UK border, like it or not, and that will be, costly. Not as costly as many think, but costly it will be, and that's something we learn from the gravity equation. So I'm very happy that you've come here today, and I'm sure that there are good reasons why we'll still be friends after Brexit, enjoy the British humor and all that. So I think the world will not collapse. I think Britain will not disappear in the Atlantic and not be immiserized. But as I don't share the pessimism of the Treasury, I think at the end your optimism is as exaggerated as the pessimism of Her Majesty's Treasury.
Is that a... So, this is the chairman's privilege to ask 3 questions, I take it.
I didn't ask a single one, right?
No, you didn't. So is that a question? I think the point is this, that on these border costs, I agree with you that the EU and our customs will want to check products that come in. Of course, they want to check them now. Of course, in the case of the EU products, they're formally not checked because they are just EU products. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that in a modern border, goods are checked away from the border. They're checked by customs. This is the point of my example from Bristol Dock. They're checked by customs before they ever reach the border. That's what a modern border looks like. And a lot of people don't seem to understand that a modern border is not one like we sort of saw in the movies, where there's a customs guy who you drive up with your lorry, Gabriel, and I go into your lorry and I give you a hard time. That's the typical movie view of the customs border, but it's not the modern border. So obviously they will want to make sure we're not importing chlorinated chicken or whatever, and have rules of origin, over products that come in from China. All that's agreed. But my point is simply this: modern border procedures say what you do is you pre-notify the customs authorities of the country, A, the status of your standards, B, what's in your lorry load, vis-a-vis those things. And then when you get to the border, either they agree or they don't. If they don't agree, you can't get in anyway. If you're bringing in chlorinated chicken and it's against the standards, your lorry will not get even to the border. You'll be told, don't come here. Don't come. Conditional on coming to the border, you will have been cleared. That's my point. And, my other point is that on standards, we won't take any chlorinated chicken to the bloody border. Why would we? We know it's not going to get through the border. The poor chickens, they'll be, I don't know what will happen to these poor bloody chickens if we take them to the border when they're clearly not compliant with standards. My point is that any intelligent exporter is only going to take things to the border that are compliant with standards. And they will have to have some way of checking the standards before they get to the border. And trade is a repetitive process. It isn't as if, every time a load comes from company Felbermayr, it's going to be any different from the one that came before. If it's a Felbermayr load and it's got no chlorinated chicken in it, it's going to conform to standards. And, Felbermayr Exports, PLC, will make sure that its products, I'm sure they will because he's a very thorough guy, he'll make sure his products conform to EU standards or to UK standards when you bring it to the UK border. And then they'll say, old son, come in. The water's lovely. So that's my main reply to you, that I think that all this stuff about costs at the border and conformity to standards has been turned into a huge kind of black intellectual hole into which people have put their prejudices. The Treasury says it's going to be awful at the border because they hate Brexit. And I say, well, look, where's the evidence for that? Given that the EU is a law-abiding institution, and so are we. Given that there are these rules of the game. And I don't know where, you're somewhere in the middle, but I don't know why. I think I'm going to kick you from, you're going to get kicked from both sides. Being in the middle is a bad place to be.
You're right about that. Now we have a couple of minutes for questions, please.
I have a simple question. Will factor mobility indeed increase as you predict, or will it go into the wrong direction?
Which effect on?
Factor mobility.
Factor mobility.
Will it increase or will it go in the wrong direction so that the good guys...
Well, the main factor that's mobile is capital. It's capital. And capital will continue to be highly mobile because the EU is very pro-capital mobility, and so are we. So I'd be very surprised if after all the huffing and puffing, capital is not freely mobile around the, across the channel and so forth. As for other factors of production, I think skilled labor will continue to be highly mobile because it's skilled labor is something that in migration we know is a valuable factor that pays its way. The thing that I think there will be immobility or less mobility will be in unskilled labor. Because the problem about unskilled labor in a world of welfare benefits is welfare benefits act as a magnet for unskilled labor. And it's very hard to have any sort of, any sort of control of your budget if you kind of have an open sort of invitation to unskilled workers from all around the world to come and join your welfare system. This is a complete no-no. And I don't know of any developed country that would tolerate that, actually. Because quite obviously, there's a big drain on the taxpayer. And this is a big problem. And of course, we're really heavily having to pay for this at the moment. And the people who are paying for it, the poorest people in our communities. And this, of course, was a big factor in Brexit.
Next question. Is it perhaps, and I don't find it in the discussion so many times, isn't it at the end not a question of freedom? To have to look at the chance of freedom, and now we have a discussion which is looking only to the losses and to go away from the imperium. And might it not better to get the discussion to the theme of freedom?
Well, you know, the thing is that freedom is freedom under the law, and you can have freedom under the law. The question then is, do you have good laws? So I don't think anyone in Britain is saying they're not free inside the EU, because clearly they have freedom under the law. What they're concerned about is the laws. Now, whether you include that in freedom or not, I mentioned it as democratic control, because you're talking about a people with a history of having a history of civil war, revolution, emigration, to get away from what they saw as unjust laws in the case of the emigrants to the United States, and the Mayflower and so on. You're talking about people that are very sensitive to having laws that are just, that they control the creators of. That's at the heart of it, you see. It's this feeling of control of the people who give you the laws. And you go back to Magna Carta, of course, the barons rebelled against King John, who said, we know proper laws here, Magna Carta, and he had to sign Magna Carta. In a way, this is much more at the heart of it than just freedom. And Brits are unfree in lots of ways. The law stops them from doing all sorts of things, and they're very happy with that, It's the question of who sets the laws and who gets to tell them to go sling their hook if you don't like. Sorry, that's another English expression. Get out of power. We don't like the laws you're bringing. We need another bunch of people in a new government. So they like to have that power.
Yeah, thanks for your energetic presentation. Question on where you started in your presentation. You said you believe that the European Union does protectionism right now against everybody else within the world. And when UK is leaving, then you are probably UK will be outside of the world. So what is the reason for your optimism that there will be a trade agreement between the protectionist European Union and the UK? And the reason why I'm asking is because if UK is leaving, then France and Germany, you mentioned agricultural products and the manufacturing products, they do not have any changes in their objective of protecting themselves against everybody else outside the European Union.
Yes, of course. Of course, the protection of the agriculture and manufacturers will continue in the European Union. But the point is this, that it only gets worse if you don't have a free trade agreement with the UK, because what's going to happen is that the UK is going to let products in from all around the world, which are going to drive down the prices of food and agriculture, food and manufacturers in the UK market. If you don't have a deal, on top of that, you have to absorb tariffs. That was kind of my point about why you should have a free trade deal rather than no deal, because those BMWs we talked about, which are the thing that your average Brit loves, okay, they come in at a certain price. After Brexit, the UK will very quickly sign a free trade agreement with the US, one of which will allow US products across the board, pretty much, free access to the UK would be my guess, in return for a better access in financial markets. We already have very, very good relationships with the US in services, but they can always be better. And so what would happen to BMW producers, for example, is they'd have to absorb the tariff, because they've got to cut their prices anyway to sell to these, to compete with these lower prices. And then if there's a tariff on top, they've got to absorb the tariff out of their margins in order to still be able to compete in the UK market. So if my advice to the EU would be, do a free trade deal, then there won't be any tariffs. What's more, the border will be seamless, if you permit me to disagree with Gabriel for 2 seconds, which is a very risky thing for me to do. So you're going to hit me over the head with the microphone. No. but if you'd permit me that luxury for a moment, I would say, you know, free trade agreement, no tariffs. Okay. Probably don't need to worry about the other stuff, Pache, Gabriel, you know, there'll be a seamless, I think there'll be a seamless border, because I think that would, both sides will behave in a civilized way, I think, and not try to discriminate and so forth, and try to be very modern on the border. So I don't think BMW have any trouble at the border. I don't think any UK customs official is going to say, are you really a BMW? Are you masquerading as a VW? Yeah, I think they're going to say, I know you're a BMW because that's what I want to drive myself. So I don't think they'll have any trouble at the border, but I think on tariffs, that's the thing where the FTA kicks in. We don't want tariffs. I don't think anybody wants tariffs. And they would redound very badly, I think. So, you know, we don't want tariffs. Therefore, there will be a free trade agreement.
So there's one last question, please. And then we are already running late.
I hope it's a simple question. I think you're right that we do not have too many border controls, but we will still have borders, yes, if you agree on that one. What is then your solution for Ireland and North Ireland?
Well, you see, a lot of people don't realize there's already a border in Ireland because it's not conformable. Northern Ireland and Ireland are not conformable in VAT and hygiene and lots of other detailed aspects. So there's already a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And the way it becomes soft border, which it has been, is through administrative off-border procedures, things like trusted trader schemes and so forth. And experts on borders, and the Irish border in particular, whether it's EU experts or UK experts or even Irish border experts, have all agreed that administrative procedures that currently exist at the Irish border will be perfectly adequate to deal with the situation when we leave the EU, particularly if there's a free trade agreement, And it comes back to this point about how borders operate. And so if there's a free trade agreement, it becomes particularly easy. Under WTO rules, it'd be the hardest, which is kind of what Gabriel and I are arguing about. It'd be the hardest because then you get into the argument of how exactly you check the stuff at the border, and is there a need for, you know, actual active checking at the border. According to modern WTO rules, you shouldn't do that at the border. Now that is a fact, Gabriel. You should check your trade facilitation agreement. It says in terms, you know, borders should be done through pre-clearance and so on. That's what the WTO mandates. And so if we didn't do that at the Irish border, which would amount to a hard border, that would be in violation of WTO rules. So I would say there's no need for a hard border in Ireland. There's no need for an Irish hard border. Before these negotiations even started, Enda Kenny, then the Prime Minister of Ireland, agreed with our government that there would be no problem over a border with Ireland. And the civil servants set to work on how that border would be dealt with through administrative means. What has happened is that this has been used as a weapon in the negotiations against the UK to make us stay inside some agreement, you know, until you know there's no risk of a hard border, quote unquote. This has been created as a problem, so that, you know, the British government and Parliament has been unwilling to accept this deal because of the fear that they might be kept in an unsatisfactory agreement indefinitely due to this so-called backstop. So the backstop's being created in order to serve the EU's punishment routine, essentially. The freedom of movement, it'll continue because everybody has agreed that the common travel area would continue. The common travel area is about freedom of movement. And that's been going on for years, even before we were in the EU, common travel area. So the common travel area, which gives you freedom of movement between the UK and the rest of Ireland, will continue. And there's no controversy about that. The hard border is all about goods, you know, and whether you need, you know, big checks and big installations to check goods and that sort of thing, which obviously nobody wants. So I think all these things are soluble. The problem is that what's happened is that the Irish government, for political reasons internally, have chosen to make this a big issue. And they've done it in order to kind of whip up their own support internally. Because as I say, the previous Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, was perfectly happy for this to be pushed to one side as an issue. And it's now become a victim of Irish politics and EU politics.
Thank you, Patrick. These are interesting views. I'm sure there's still plenty of opportunity over drinks. Also, you described Brexit as an unfriendly thing. I think it is on both sides. But outside, I promise it will be friendly.
Oh, that's very good.
So thanks for coming. And come back again. Thank you.